All right, so you want to deep dive into the Menendez brothers. Well, let me tell you something. This case, it's like a true crime iceberg.
Oh, it is.
I mean, we all know the headlines, right? Like wealthy Beverly Hills family, a double homicide. The trial was basically just a media frenzy.
Yeah.
But trust me on this, there is so much more going on beneath the surface here.
There is. There really is. You know, this case, it's not just about a shocking crime. It's about family secrets and potential abuse and the media just eating it up. And it just brings up so many questions that are still relevant.
And that is exactly why you are here. You can like cut through all the noise and like see all the patterns and pull out all the good stuff, the stuff that makes you think.
I try.
So before we get into all the twists and turns, let's just like start with the Menendez family. Like what were they like before the murders happened?
Well, on the surface, they seem like they lived this really charmed life.
Right, picture perfect.
Exactly. You've got Jose, the father. He's got this incredible rags to riches story. You know, Cuban immigrant, becomes a successful entertainment executive.
Wow.
Kitty, the mom, she's a stay-at-home mom. They've got the two sons, Lyle and Erik. They live in a mansion. Like, they have everything.
Okay, but every family, especially one that's like constantly being watched, they're bound to have some cracks in that picture-perfect facade.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, some of them were showing even before that night. Like, take Lyle, for example. He got into Princeton, which is great, but he really struggled academically. He even got caught plagiarizing.
Oh, wow.
And then you've got Erik. He was a really talented tennis player, but he was also involved in some burglaries with his brother.
Okay, so not exactly your average Beverly Hills teenagers. It makes you wonder, like, what was going on in that family? What kind of pressure were they under?
Exactly. And while we should never forget that nothing justifies murder, I think it's really important to understand the family dynamics if we're going to try to understand this case.
Yeah. It's like trying to put together a puzzle, but the pieces don't fit. Speaking of puzzles, the crime scene was really brutal.
Oh, it was awful.
Multiple shotgun blasts.
Yeah.
Up close and personal.
The amount of violence, I mean, investigators had never seen anything like it in that area. In fact, they thought initially that it was a mob hit because of Jose's connections to the entertainment industry.
It's interesting.
It was a different level of aggression, calculated aggression that you don't usually see.
Yeah, which makes the brothers' behavior after the murders even more strange.
Yeah.
Because they didn't exactly lay low. They bought Rolex watches, a Porsche. They were spending money like it was going out of style.
They were crafting an image. They were trying to buy their way into this new life, this fantasy life.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. They went to a Knicks game, and they were in the background of a Mark Jackson trading card. Like, what is that about?
I know, it's so strange. It doesn't fit, and yet it was their undoing, this one little tiny detail, but it was everywhere. It was
Right.
plastered across the news, and people were interested.
Wow. Talk about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But this spending spree, as wild as it is, that's just the beginning. What really got people talking and what really unraveled their story was Erik's therapist, Dr. Oziel.
Right, because with Dr. Oziel, we're not talking about regular therapy sessions. We're talking recorded confessions, a mistress turned informant.
Oh my gosh.
Like a Hollywood movie.
It's really like a Hollywood movie, but it's real life.
Yeah.
And with real consequences. And that is where we are going to pick things up after we take a quick break.
It's really where things get, more complicated than a screenplay, because now you're not dealing with just a crime, you're dealing with the psychology of, like, what happens when you're trying to understand or grapple with a really terrible act.
So are you saying that Erik's confession, the one to his friend Craig, and then that screenplay that they wrote together,
Right.
those could be seen as them trying to process what they did?
Almost as if they were trying to write their own lives into, like, a fictional narrative, to distance themselves from what they had done.
And then you bring Dr. Oziel into it.
Right.
Erik's therapist, who's recording all of these sessions.
Yeah.
And suddenly, it's not just a question of guilt or confession, it's an ethical nightmare.
Exactly. Exactly, because now you're talking about, where does a therapist's duty lie,
Yeah.
when they hear a confession like that. I mean, on the one hand, you have this, like, really sacred trust between a patient and a therapist.
Of course.
But then on the other hand, you have this knowledge of a horrible, violent crime.
And then it's not even just him, right? You bring Judalon Smith into this whole thing, Oziel's mistress, who then becomes an informant. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
It's like a John Grisham novel. You can't make this stuff up.
It's true.
It's a real-life plot twist written by one of the... Oh, that's right. One of the
Sure.
brothers was already writing screenplays.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And you're right to bring up the ethics of it all, because Oziel is claiming that Lyle threatened him, and that's why he handed over the tapes.
Okay.
So was it a breach of trust, or was it justified?
Wow. Well, those tapes, they were definitely a game changer for the prosecution
Oh, for sure.
because they painted a very different picture than what Lyle and Erik were saying in court.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the trials. And, that first one, which was insane, it was like the whole country was
The
watching.
first trial was a media frenzy, for sure. Cameras in the courtroom, headlines every day.
Oh, my gosh, yeah.
It was a spectacle. But beyond all of that, it was where the brothers, through their lawyer, Leslie Abramson, introduced this whole new narrative
Right.
of abuse.
It was a completely different story. They went from being these cold-blooded killers to being victims of this, like, really awful, toxic family.
Right.
And it worked on some of the jurors,
Right.
especially the women, which led to a hung jury and a mistrial.
That's right. The jury just couldn't agree. They were totally divided, and it shows you how polarizing the case was.
And that's so interesting when you think about what it was like back then. This was the early 90s. And people, especially male victims, talking about abuse, especially sexual abuse, I mean, that wasn't happening.
And it's a reminder that justice isn't always so simple.
Wow.
You have to take the social climate into account.
So the prosecution, they didn't have it easy in that first trial, did they? Because at first they were saying that it was all about the money, but then there was that whole thing where Jose was going to disinherit the brothers, so that kind of backfired.
Right. And then on top of that, they tried to argue that men can't be raped, which didn't help their case.
Oh, no.
It really highlighted the biases in the legal system back then.
But they did have those tapes from Dr. Oziel.
They
And
did.
they used those tapes to say that the brothers weren't being truthful about the abuse because of how they were acting in the tapes and because they had never said anything before.
Right. So it became this battle of the experts. Like, were these recovered memories or were they fake memories?
Oh, man.
It really opened up a can of worms.
That's a whole other deep dive right there.
Yeah.
But let's move on to the second trial. That one wasn't as public as the first one, but the outcome was a lot more final. So the first trial, it's this huge deal, everyone's watching, and then suddenly, no more cameras.
Right.
What was up with that second trial?
They wanted to, tone it down.
Makes sense.
Let the lawyers and the judge, actually do their job.
Right, no more made-for-TV drama.
Mm.
But did anything else change? Besides, the lack of cameras?
Oh, yeah, big time. The judge, he wasn't having any of that abuse talk. I mean, they could still, say it was self-defense, but he really limited what they could say about Jose.
Wow, so the jury couldn't even really consider what the brothers had gone through, especially with Jose.
Exactly. And then to make things even more, difficult.
Yeah.
The jury, they couldn't even consider manslaughter for Kitty
Oh, wow.
because of some Supreme Court ruling. It's crazy how much power a judge has.
Yeah, for sure. So no cameras, a judge who's not, it's exactly sympathetic, and limits on what the defense can even say. What happened?
Guilty. Both of them. First-degree murder. Life in prison. No parole.
Wow. So that was it. Case closed.
Pretty much, for a
Right.
while at least. But, they couldn't just make them disappear.
Right, there was still brothers, still had a story.
Yeah, and for years they were separated. But then, get this, in 2018, they put them back together. Same housing unit.
Really, after all that time?
Yeah, it was a big deal. I mean, letting them be, I don't know, brothers again, even though...
Even though they were in prison?
Yeah.
Wow, so what have they been up to? I mean, besides...
Well, they've been working on, rehab programs,
Okay.
and they even started this thing. It's called the Green Space Project.
What is that?
It's like this prison reform thing, trying to make things better for everyone.
So even in prison, they're trying to do some good. It's kind of amazing.
It is. It really is. But it doesn't end there.
Oh, no. What now?
Remember that whole thing with the abuse allegations?
Yeah.
Well, a former member of Menudo, Roy Russello,
Oh, wow.
he accused Jose of abusing him, too.
No way. Are you serious?
Yeah, and it was a huge deal because Jose, he was a big shot at RCA Records.
Yeah, you worked with a lot of young artists.
Exactly. So it makes you wonder, was this just the tip of the iceberg?
That's awful.
Oh.
So what did the brothers do when they heard about this?
Well, they saw it as a way to maybe reopen their case.
Oh, wow.
Maybe this new information could help them.
So even after all this time, the trials, the convictions, the years in prison, the Menendez case is still, going on.
It really is. It makes you think about, what is truth? What is justice? How do we deal with abuse? And it's messy, it's complicated, and there are no easy answers.
It really is. It's like maybe we'll never know everything,
Probably not.
but it's the questions themselves, right? The
Hmm.
wondering, the trying to understand, that's what matters because it makes us think and it makes us want to be better.
It really does.
Well, this has been incredible. I feel like I've learned so much, and I'm sure our listeners have too.